A very good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to this meeting and press opportunity with Australian-Latvian journalist Peter Greste and his parents, Mrs. Louise Greste and Mr. Juris Greste. We are very honored and very delighted that Peter Greste and his parents are here with us today. And just wanted to say that Peter Greste is visiting Riga to participate in the World Press Freedom events here, and we thought that it would be a very good opportunity for him to meet fellow journalists and to share his experience and to tell you what he went through actually during this past year, which was actually more than a year, and probably to talk about the role and importance of free media. And then, of course, we may want to hear a few words also from Peter Greste's parents, who, like all of us, never lost hope that Peter would be released from prison and supported him in whatever way they could. And then, of course, we'll take some questions from you. And now, Peter Greste, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for coming today. I'm delighted to be here for a whole bunch of reasons. First of all, to thank Latvia for its support while I was in prison. I'm not sure how many of you know, but I didn't realize I was a Latvian citizen until I was in prison, and someone smuggled in a news article which described me as a Latvian Australian. I've always cherished my Latvian heritage, but it was formalising my citizenship wasn't something that I'd had the opportunity to do, and it was while I was in prison that the Latvian ministry, Latvian government, recognised my citizenship. I'd registered as a Latvian some time ago, but never actually followed through with the paperwork, and that was something that was very, very important to me for a whole number of reasons, not least of all because it gave me a lot of additional diplomatic support and political support while I was in prison. But at a personal level, I was very proud of those connections. I was very proud of the role that Latvia played, and it was incredibly encouraging to know that we had the Latvian government and the Latvian people behind us. I'm here before you. I'm very happy to be here, but I'm not free. I'm not a free man. My colleagues, Mohammed Fahmy and Baher Mohammed, are also not free, as you may know. Our retrial is continuing. I was exonerated by the Court of Cassation, the Egyptian Appeals Court. They overturned my conviction, or our conviction, and ordered a retrial. But I am still a defendant in that trial, which has a number of effects. First of all, there is a limit to what I can speak to you about today. But it is also a reminder that this is an ongoing battle, that we have a legal fight to win. We did nothing wrong while we were to put us in prison in the first place. We have done nothing wrong. We will continue to protest our innocence. But of course, this still has an effect on, frankly, my work as a journalist. And so this is something that we all need to bear in mind. The other reason I'm very pleased to be here is because this has become, the issue of press freedom has become a very important one to me for very obvious reasons, at a very personal level, at a professional level. I've spoken several times since I was released about the importance of a free press, particularly at a time when I think there is enormous pressure on freedom of speech, particularly by governments that are using legislation to clamp down on national security as a way of limiting not just the freedom of the speech, but of the public's right to know, to participate in decisions that are made in the public's name. And I think we need to be very, very careful about blindly accepting governments' drive towards to impose what appears to be rational security legislation, but with rather devastating effects on the freedom of speech, on the public's right to know, on the public's right to interrogate the work that governments do on our behalf. And I think we need to make sure that that debate is an open one. I think this subject will come up during the current conference, and I would encourage everybody to pay particularly close attention to that. I think I'll leave those as my opening remarks, and I know that I think my parents would also like to make a few statements, but and we'll take some questions.
Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to add to Peter's words a thank you to Latvia for all the support that you gave us. It was incredible. The Latvian ambassador in Egypt was particularly helpful to us, and alongside the Australian ambassador, they were the ones that supported the whole family through the whole of the year and a bit. If we hadn't have had those particular people who really worked from inside, I don't think we would have achieved the result that we have. So a particular big thank you to Latvia. It was a particularly difficult year for the family, as you probably would understand, but we have got through it, and at least we are halfway to the end result, I hope. Thank you.
I think enough has perhaps been said by the family. I'll respond to some questions that you might have later on.
Very good. Thank you. We'll take your questions now. Please state your name and media. And the working languages are Latvian and English, so you can ask the questions in both languages. Thank you.
Juris Pēders, I'm president of Latvian Journalist Union. Peter, would you tell us about social guarantees for your employer in system when journalists work in so difficult conditions?
I'm just not entirely sure what you mean by social guarantees. Could you?
Wages, like because
yeah.
like wages, like in time when you are in prison, and after that, what is because what is social guarantees system for a journalist who work in so hard and difficult conditions?
Yeah, look, I think that, I mean, first of all, I want to acknowledge Al Jazeera for continuing to pay my salary while I was in prison and while I was unable to work as a journalist, and also for giving us, the family, extraordinary support. The problem for journalists, particularly working in these kinds of environments, is the personal risk that we take. And we can't possibly do that job effectively if we don't have confidence in our employer's ability to support us. One of the problems I think that every journalist faces at the moment, every news organisation faces at the moment, are extraordinary financial pressures. There's never been a time that news has been under such pressure from the internet, from the disruption to the financial models. And I know that a lot of news organisations are cutting back very dramatically on their foreign coverage, particularly in hostile environments where it's both dangerous, difficult and expensive to operate. But if we don't have if we can't be confident that we have the backing of news organisations, then it becomes extraordinarily difficult to function properly in those kinds of environments. I've been very lucky that I work for an organisation that has the commitment to support this kind of work. But not every organisation has. I think news organisations need to understand, though, that they have a social responsibility to both cover these kinds of stories and also support journalists, support those of us that are working on the front lines, particularly if you find yourself in trouble. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Marielle Vituro, Radio France Internationale. I have a question. We have seen that the situation of press freedom has worsened in the last years. Do you think it could be possible to create an international system to protect journalists all over the world, and a system who could be applied to all the journalists?
This is one of my big concerns. There are a lot of organisations that are working for press freedom at the moment, organisations like Article 19, like Freedom House, like the Committee to Protect Journalists and so on. And also a lot of pieces of paper, international agreements and so on that are floating around the world, but clearly none of it is working particularly effectively. One of the remarkable things about our case, the Al Jazeera 3's case, was the extraordinary extent to which the international community of journalists pulled together. We had our colleagues, our opponents, Al Jazeera's opponents like BBC and CNN, all publicly supporting us, publicly advocating for us. And I think that pressure had a significant impact on the progress of our case. I don't believe I would be here before you today if it wasn't for that support. But the tragedy is that so many other journalists don't have that support. And why it happened for us is something I really don't fully understand. Why it hasn't happened for my colleagues, equally I don't fully understand. What we need to do is find a mechanism to pull all of this together. We're throwing a few ideas around at the moment. We're having a very significant meeting tomorrow to try and discuss ways of broadening out, either broadening out the existing protections for journalists or coming up with a new mechanism. I think there's been talk of a freedom charter, a press freedom charter of some sort. There are a lot of ideas that are being discussed. There's a lot of work to be done on this, but I think what is very clear is that the existing systems don't work. I mean, the statistics are right there. Freedom House released its report a few weeks ago. Some 200 journalists that were in prison last year, more than 60 that were murdered. The worst, press freedom is now the worst than it's been since records began. And so we need to do something. We just need to come up with the right mechanisms.
Yeah, well, my name is Yudis Kaja. I work for a couple of media here, Wall Street Journal and the Spanish news agency. But I'm more or less asking this sort of just as a personal question because it's a thought I at least had while you were in the Egyptian prison. You were dealing with what I think could be reasonably called an intractably evil regime, a dictatorship that was not going to, release you because they saw the rightness of your cause and all that. Did you ever think of the possibility of rescue? The SAS coming in after you, the SEALs. And if you were merely a guy in a suit working as an upper management level executive for a foreign company in Egypt and had been taken by bandits rather than the government, that would have been an option.
Yeah, it's a nice dramatic idea, and perhaps we had some fantasies, but I think in practical terms, what we're always looking for were legal and political solutions to this. We were caught up. I mean, there is obviously a very significant difference between being taken by bandits and being taken by the government.
Is there?
Official. Well, I think there is, under the circumstances, I mean, very practical differences. I think. Look, the fact is that we've chose to deal with this through the judicial process. It was something that we always insisted on our innocence, and I still am insisting on my innocence. As naive as it may be, I've felt that we needed always to demonstrate our innocence, and I've always expressed my willingness to cooperate with the court. Under any circumstances. I'm still willing to cooperate with the Egyptian authorities and the Egyptian court because I believe that ultimately we need to stand by the principles, stand by the fact of our innocence, stand by the evidence rather than try to run from justice.
Can I just add something to that? And Peter may not know this, but as a father I have to admit that there were points when I had visions of getting him out in a garbage truck.
More questions? No? Yes, over there.
My name is Jeanette Minnie. I'm a freedom of expression activist from South Africa and the Africa region. I just want to know, have you got a message for other journalists who find themselves in similar circumstances and for their families that you can relate from your own personal experience, the torment you must have gone through, the moments of doubt and anguish that you must have gone through?
I'll start. I think my mother certainly has something to contribute to that question. The thing that kept me going was an understanding that we stood for a principle, that this wasn't just about us. Obviously, the charges that were laid against us were against the very specific work that we had done as journalists. We were accused of supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. But I also felt that we were in prison on a principle, and we needed to stand by that principle. We needed to fight for this, to fight for justice, not just for ourselves, but also for the larger cause of freedom of expression, freedom of the press. That was made a whole lot easier by the fact that we had so much international support behind us and so many of our colleagues backing us. But I think particularly through some of the darker moments, the more depressed moments, that was the thing that kept me going more than anything else. The knowledge that we really needed to stand up for this, for the sake of everybody who is involved in the media, and also for the sake of the public that depends on us to keep them informed. I know that might sound a little bit pious, but I really do believe that now more than ever, the work that we do is important for public understanding and the public debate. There's a lot of discussion at the moment about the role that the internet plays and the fact that there's such a large range of sources. The internet is often portrayed as presenting a multiplicity of sources, and so we no longer need journalists. The issue of freedom of speech is no longer quite so important because everyone has access to Twitter, to Facebook. Everyone can blog, can post a blog about whatever they think, and so there is a public debate. But my concern is that what we need now is more than ever is journalists to make sense of what's taking place in the world. We need journalists, professional journalists, who are capable of interrogating the ideas, of asking difficult questions, of following up, of doing the research in ways that citizen journalists may not have the experience or the training to do. And so I think that this is, we need to understand that journalism in principle is something that we need for democratic societies to function properly. That might be a roundabout way of getting to answer your question, but it's an understanding of that role, of the significance of what we do, that really helped me get through some of the darker times in prison.
I think you spoke about the family, or the issue of the family, and what the support that they could give. We believe that each case is very individual. Peter has spoken about the principles involved that he stood by, and the family certainly took those principles up and ran with them. But as far as giving advice to other families, I think it's the sort of thing that, we had a saying in our family that we must turn every stone and look under it to see if there is a possibility that this might be the thing that helps to move the case along or help to reach a conclusion. So it's something that I don't think each individual case, it depends on the country, it depends on the culture, it depends on the language, it depends on so many things that come into play. The political situation and everything else. So it's something that I feel that perhaps we can't give a lot of advice to about how to go about it.
Also, to just add one more observation after Lois's words, and without wanting to appear to say the very obvious, never ever lose hope. It is often not easy, but if you don't maintain hope and trust and faith in justice winning out in the end, then you're handicapping yourself right from the start. So always maintain hope that you can achieve freedom and justice. We don't at all know, and we might never know, what particular grain of sand that we managed to overturn was the key piece that helped us to secure Peter's freedom. But the most important thing is never to lose hope and continue persisting.
Yeah, you talked about family. Is it not somewhat extraordinary, though, if we're talking about journalists in the broader sense, in the third world and non-democratic countries, that you, Peter, had two family members in a free democracy in Australia, whereas there are maybe journalists where their family is also under the regime or partly under the regime. I remember when I was writing about Latvia while living in Sweden, that I always had a little bit of a thought in the back of my mind, what might happen to my two cousins who lived here. And indeed, I think one of my cousins' husband was got some questions asked about who this guy was in Sweden, writing evil stuff about the Soviet Union. How about that? I mean, what family is not necessarily, they can also be hostages as well as the journalist. In this case, where they were not. But
I totally agree. That's why I said it's a very individual thing, that it does depend on the whole situation. And yeah.
Juris, I've got to tell you, I feel extraordinarily lucky on so many levels. You know, the fact that I have my family and such an extraordinarily capable family is something that I'm very fortunate for, and not something that I mean, my family are naturals at this kind of thing, and they have a lot of skills. It's not that not every other family has to be able to draw on a lot of experience. The fact that they were in a place where they could speak was equally very fortunate. The fact that I worked for other organisations like the BBC supported us, and other news organisations around got behind us. The fact that I worked for an organisation like Al Jazeera that had the resources to support us. I mean, the fact that I'm half Latvian and got the Latvian government, the Latvian people involved was very fortunate. The fact that my colleague Mohammed Fahmy is half Canadian. So, you know, there were so many elements that worked towards us, and I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier. Very few of my colleagues around the world who are caught in these kinds of situations have the same kind of fortunate confluence or convergence of influences that worked so positively for me. All I can say is, and again this goes back to what I was saying earlier, the thing that sustained me more than anything else was the understanding that we had to fight for a bigger principle, and that principle exists regardless of the circumstances. I'm very mindful of that problem, and mindful of the fact that where press freedom is under threat, it's not just the journalists that suffer. It is the families, it is the news organisations, and it is also the sources that talk to the journalists. And so what we need to do, and we're discussing this in the conference this weekend, is again to bear in mind that when we talk of freedom of the press, it isn't just about us, the reporters. It's about everything else that goes on around us. There are all sorts of points of pressure, all sorts of people in all sorts of places that are squeezed by these issues, that are squeezed by authoritarian, not just authoritarian regimes either, but also by groups that don't like being interrogated by the press. And it's more than not just Islamic extremism. There are right-wing extremists as well that are responsible for these kinds of pressures. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm mindful of it. We just need to keep fighting, keep talking about it.
Hi, Margareta Svensson, Swedish Radio. 2 questions. You talk about the support. What did you know about the surroundings and the support you got when you were in prison? And also, what did you know? Did you know anything about the risk you took by going there in the first place?
On the question of support, we were having fairly regular visits from our families and also from the Australian Embassy. The Latvian Embassy also paid visits when they could. And so I had some idea of the size of the campaign. We were getting information about what was happening to us, what the campaign was, what was being done in our name outside of prison. here and there. We knew about the Zip the Lips campaigns, we knew about some of the letters that people were writing, we knew about the Twitter, the social media campaigns and so on, but my family kept saying to me, look, you really don't understand the extent of this. And I acknowledged, I said, well, I'm sure I don't, how could I possibly not understand? But privately, I'm thinking, well, look, I'm a journalist. Of course I get this. I know how this is going to play out. But I've got to tell you, I had absolutely no idea of just how extraordinary the campaign really was. The Free AJ Staff hashtag received, I think, something like 3 billion impressions around the world in the time that we're in prison. 3 billion. If you do the maths and realise, okay, there are a few people that were responsible for quite a few hundred, and I suspect my family was responsible for a few thousand of those impressions, but even so, if you just understand the impact of that, you realise, for us in prison, it was impossible to conceive of it, to understand it. I've since had a look online and seen some of the pictures of my colleagues, the whole of the BBC newsroom standing up there with their lips taped up with the Free AJ Staff signs. CNN was doing the same. The ABC in Australia, small newsrooms in tiny places like Malaysia and in Latin America were doing the same thing. It was absolutely extraordinary. I can't walk down the street here in Riga and people come up and stop and say, we're so delighted to see you out. People were so extraordinarily aware of our case. I had no conception of the scale of it, and I'm honestly extraordinarily humbled by that, because I feel, and honoured as well, and very, very lucky for that. And again, I want to thank everybody that took part in that. On the subject of risks, we knew that Egypt was in a difficult environment. We were aware that we were under pressure from the authorities as Al Jazeera. We took a few decisions that we thought at the time made sense to us. We didn't want to confront the authorities. We wanted to work without giving them the opportunity to question us, to put us under difficult circumstances, to ask us about what we were doing. We had no reason, in terms of our professional work, to be concerned about it, but it's no secret that Egypt and Qatar had a difficult relationship, likewise Al Jazeera. But I think that no one anticipated really what ultimately happened. As I said, we did nothing. We performed no criminal acts. We weren't responsible for colluding with the Muslim Brotherhood. We were responsible for doing good journalism. And so we felt that as long as we played by the rules, there shouldn't be any reason to be concerned, and we were playing by the rules. I've always felt that as long as you stand on principle, then you should be okay. And to a certain extent, I feel, even though we remain on trial, I do feel vindicated. I think people have recognised that fact, that we were performing professionally and with integrity. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we had the support that we did, and it's one of the reasons why we're at the stage that we are at the moment.
I'd like to add one more observation to the campaign aspect of it, or dare I say, marketing aspect of it. And that is give credit, special credit, to Peter's colleagues in Nairobi, where that idea of the hashtag Free AJ Staff and the taped over lips started from. Now, I'm sure they thought a lot about it. Maybe it was something that was quite spontaneous, yet from a campaign strategy point of view, it was a very marketable image that resonated with many people at a number of levels, and it just spread like wildfire. Now, maybe it was more good luck than good management, but it was certainly a very effective step or tool.
there is one other thing I want to mention. I want to talk about risks. Obviously, by definition, the work that I was doing, not just in Egypt but in other parts of East Africa where I was based, carries a degree of risk. As a journalist, we make decisions. Each of us makes decisions about the level of risk we're prepared to undertake. And I've always felt that if I want to do my job properly, then I need to accept a degree of risk. We can't operate properly. We can't work in places like Somalia, Congo, South Sudan, which has been the area that I've been functioning in, working in for most of the past 5 or 6 years, without accepting that there is a certain amount of risk. I believe in what we do, and I believe that we need to also sometimes be prepared to take risks for the sake of greater public understanding. So I think that, as a matter of principle, I think it's something that we need to think through very carefully, but we also need to be prepared to take. I'm not saying that we do this, we become reckless, but I do believe that, at least in some quarters of our profession, this is a part of our life. This is what we have to accept.
Thank you. We'll take one final question.
Hello, I'm Reem Qatami from Jordan Media Institute. I want to ask, some Arab TV news stations nowadays tend to focus more on the in-house reporters. They avoid to have field reporters. So what kind of advice can you give to these new emerging new Arab reporters who are eager to cover the conflict areas?
Gosh, it's a very difficult question. You know, I think as I said earlier, the environment at the moment makes it incredibly difficult to do this kind of work properly. I'm very concerned about the way that news organisations have been eroded in their ability to pay for the kind of journalism that really needs to be done. And it's difficult on a whole bunch of levels. It's difficult because all of the marketing men tell us that foreign news is not particularly popular, that audiences don't like to read about foreign stories. They're more interested in what's taking place in their own neighbourhood than they are than what's taking place outside their borders. And so there's a tendency to focus more on the cheaper local journalism than there is on sending journalists into areas that are both expensive to operate in, but also in areas which may not get so many readers. This is not a popular thing to say under the current environment, but I think that we still have a social responsibility to do that kind of work. We can't possibly expect intelligent public debate on foreign policy unless people know what is taking place outside our borders. And that means that news organisations have to be prepared to bite the bullet and support foreign news coverage. That means supporting people to go out in the field, not cutting corners expecting freelancers to go out and do it for them. They need to be able to, if they're working with freelancers, they need to be able to pay them properly and give them not just the financial support, not just give them the commissions, but give them the backup if they get into trouble. I'm very careful and very cautious about encouraging young, inexperienced journalists to go into the field to do that kind of foreign work, because I think it does require experience and it does require the kind of backing that fully funded news organisations are prepared to give. But I think we need to take a very good hard look at how we do foreign news and make sure that we give the people that are willing to do it the support that they need, and make sure that we understand that there is a really important social value in it as well.
Thank you, Juris. Thank you, Luis, and thank you, Juris as well. And this concludes our press conference. Thank you.